Most CEOs treat extreme ownership as a mindset, something you either have or you don't. It's not a mindset, it's a system, and every system drifts the moment you stop auditing it. Welcome to iCommunicate. I'm Mark Altman, founder of MindsetGo and your host. Today we're looking at what happens when a CEO stops treating ownership as a poster on the wall and starts treating it like a P&L, measured, escalated, and re-audited on a schedule. And why that exact discipline gets you to scale is the discipline most likely to calcify into the thing that quietly slows you down. My guest built his culture around a book he discovered before it even existed by accident, sitting between its authors at a dinner. John Brooks is CEO of Warehouse on Wheels, a trailer rental business he's scaling from 37 locations towards 100, from Montreal to Monterey and everywhere in between. He doesn't talk about ownership and purpose as values. He talks about them as things you build, measure, and recheck like any other operating number. John, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. Welcome to iCommunicate.
Hi, Mark. Thank you so much for having me. I love what you're doing and just happy to contribute to the cause.
Awesome. So, John, obviously I mentioned in the opening about, Jocko Willink, meeting him is extreme ownership. And just to get our viewers up to speed, before I ask John this first question, if you're not familiar, it's a really well-known, amazing book and a set of principles that are so applicable to leadership, culture, you name it. And some of the core principle of extreme ownership is leaders own everything in their world, no exceptions. There is no one else to blame. If the team fails, the leader failed somewhere in the planning, communication, or execution. So we talk about no bad teams, only bad leaders. We talk about believe, leaders must believe in the mission, and then decentralized command. So with that said, John, I know you're such a proponent of this. So tell us about that dinner. How did that all play out? That's such an interesting story.
Yeah. So I guess the short version, I showed up late, which I hate. I'm always about being on time. I like to say if you're not 5 minutes early, you're 5 minutes late. But I show up late to this dinner, a bunch of private equity backed CEOs and CFOs. And the last seat was in the back of the room between these two guys that I figured were either bodyguards or were in the wrong place because they could have come straight out of casting for any sort of military brochure. And so I sat between these two guys, and over the course of a couple hours over dinner, they were telling me stories about their time in the service and found out that they were retired Navy SEALs. They had been in the Battle of Ramadi. In fact, they were part of the chain of command for Chris Kyle, the American sniper. Leif Babin was his direct boss. Jocko was Leif's boss, and so forth. But at the end of the dinner, I was already pretty impressed. They got up and gave what I think is one of the first presentations of the concepts of extreme ownership. It was about the time the book was going to be released. And so I was just mesmerized with the concepts, the simplicity of it all, thinking about how could we take this back into our organization and apply it. And then he really got me at the end when he told the story about when it was time for them to come home after a long, hard-fought battle.
Mm-hmm.
And they had intelligence on a particular target that they had been studying for months, and they knew where this target was going to be. And so the option was either they hand that off to the crew that had just arrived on the front lines, or that they take on the mission. And they had been there for months and knew the terrain and knew what to look for and all the complications that come with it. And Jocko presented it to his group. He said, we got two choices. And he said, but at the end of the day, the group decided, if not us, then who? And that line just hit me like a bolt of lightning. And I have used it time and time again with my management teams. When we set expectations of our team, when we define processes, when we have, the way we measure success in our business, if we're not willing to rise to that occasion, then who should be? And so that really resonated with me, in addition to the concepts, some of which you outlined.
So, John, listening to that story, I'm a big fan of the term. I recently heard the term, someone used it I was working with, called language precision.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, wow, because I'm a big word choice guy.
Mm-hmm.
And as a matter of fact, I'll just make this point to introduce my question to you is that, anytime you look up communication, it says, it's 93% body language and this, that, and the other thing. And I say, that may be, but
Mm-hmm.
words matter, right?
Yeah,
Like words really matter. So my,
absolutely.
my question for you is, Jocko's book's been incredibly successful, yet it uses the word extreme. Kim Scott has a book, Radical Candor, right, which is another very polarizing word, radical. So I'm just
Mhm.
curious. We live in a generationally, we're shifting a little bit away from words like that because
Sure.
people associate. So I'm just curious what you think of when I talk about words like extreme and radical, and is that good?
Yeah, I think it is. I think it's impactful. I think it for those that are curious, it makes you go that next step to understand what that means. And I've actually even had a conversation with Jocko during another event where I was at, and there was some debate about the name of the book
Hmm.
and whether or not that was the right approach or whether it was going to come across too hard. And it's funny, in my own communication style, my team jokes I have all these Brooksisms that I share, and I try to keep it simple, just like Jocko talks about, and very direct. And so we talk about things like standards over feelings. You know, you got to live it, don't preach it. I have this own internal kind of call that I teach myself, or I say to myself, to as I'm facing a hard decision, and it's listen first, pray for wisdom, lead with courage, and own the outcome.
Hmm.
And to me, that grounds me in, okay, get your head right here. We got to make a big decision. And so I use things like that all the time. So I agree with you. Language and word choice is tremendous. I got another interesting wrinkle on that. So Jocko loves to use the word good.
Okay.
And so he talks about that in the context of guys would come to him with challenges, complaining, we didn't get the equipment, I didn't get the promotion. And he would always answer with good. And eventually the guys caught on and they would come to him and say, now look, I'm going to tell you we didn't get this, but I know what you're going to say. And eventually he asked him, well, do you know why I say that? And then no. And he said, because we have time to get better. We have time to figure out another way around it.
Hmm.
We understand the obstacle that stands in front of us. And one of the interesting things I just came across is there is a poem that Mother Teresa posted inside the home in Calcutta, where she took care of the kids.
Wow.
And she's credited with it, but didn't write it. And it's called Do It Anyway. And if you read the words of that poem, I draw the connection back to Jocko's good. And I'm pretty proud of the fact that I connected Mother Teresa and Jocko, my thought
Wow.
process. But
Wow.
that to
That's
me is another example of do it anyway. The
wow.
word choice that you were talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting because it feels like in the last, I don't know why, but I've been involved in the last few weeks a lot about conversations about empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
Had a guest on the last podcast, and he wrote a book called Nobody Cares What You Think. And so, it's like shifting from a victim's mindset
Yeah.
to feeling empowered, do it anyway. Like I
Yeah.
really love the messaging behind that. It's very empowering. One thing, John, that I think about a lot as an owner and an entrepreneur, and knowing how you've scaled your business so successfully, I feel like, you hear the term working in the business versus on the business.
Sure.
And when you scale, things break often when you scale. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm just curious, so much of when you and I were getting to know each other, you have a very proactive mentality. And
Mm-hmm.
so I'm just curious, what are some things that maybe didn't break as you were scaling because you did things proactively? And what may be some of those things that you got ahead of the curve on to prevent the break?
Yeah, I think for me, as I pulled on my experiences from other successes and failures, and pulling it back to the concept you're talking about in communication and clarity of communication, I felt like we had to build a language internally that we could all point to and understand. And then I thought we had to have a extremely clear understanding of expectations from day one. So the language is much grounded in extreme ownership and those principles that you and I have talked about. But the expectation piece is where from the day you start working for us, you're literally handed a letter from me that talks about what I call the ultimate expectation. And in that, we talk about the fact you've been hired to do a job. You are highly qualified. We're glad you're here. We're blessed to have you on the team. But above and beyond that, my ultimate expectation for you is to take action when it makes our team members safer, it pleases our customers, and it advances our strategy without ever being asked or without ever asking permission. The ultimate expectation is for you to take that ownership. And so we start that from day one. And then we build upon it with the book, with the concepts of extreme ownership and the way we train and educate folks as they progress through their careers with us. And to me, that's really kind of the glue that's kind of held that together.
John, I got a really quick, funny story for you about expectations. And the story is that my son, who just finished his freshman year in college, likes to do work for the company. The problem is, and he's the great kid. I have two boys and a girl, and he's a great kid. The problem is he's not reliable consistently. So he wants to do work on the website. So this is the deal I made him, John, okay?
Mhm.
And because he's not reliable, the deal I made him is I said, I'll tell you what, you give me a scope of work and a cost. If you exceed expectations,
Mhm.
I will give you double, okay?
Yep.
If you meet expectations, I will pay you what we agreed on. And John, this
Mhm.
is the best part. If you're below expectations, you get nothing. Okay.
Absolutely.
So we make this deal, John, right?
Mhm.
So we're talking last night, and he's like, he's fired up to have a chance to earn double and this, that, and the other
Yeah.
thing. I go, I'm just curious, before this conversation ends, are you interested in defining what those expectations are? Because I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to walk away with nothing, you know? So,
Absolutely.
and I think for me, when you talk about expectations, I want to go a little deeper on this because
Sure.
you make it seem so seamless. And I think for you and the culture you built at Warehouse on Wheels, it probably is because of the hard work you put in.
Mhm.
What I want to know from you is if I came to visit you and spent a week with you and your team,
Mhm.
would I be able to know what defines rock star at Warehouse on Wheels and what is meeting expectations and what is like, is that
Yeah.
clear to your leaders and teams what that looks like?
I hope so. And if it's not, it's on me. That's a failure of leadership on my part. So we have the traditional operating metrics, all again Brooksisms about what we expect from an asset utilization standpoint, P&L performance, and so forth. But we also then have these cultural measures that we've implemented. So a couple times a year, we're surveying people. We're measuring culture like an operating process. And so we're using Gallup's Q12 as our foundation. But then we ask three basic questions, open-ended. What's the single best idea you have to improve Warehouse on Wheels? What's the silliest thing we're doing as an organization? And what does working at Warehouse on Wheels mean to you? And so, to your point, what I hope is because the way we take that as a measurement and we treat it as an operating process, we take those results and we literally put action plans around them. We literally address every open ended comment, whether it's a town hall meeting, a newsletter article, some other means of communication to let our team know that we hear you and here's our perspective. We may not answer it exactly the way you wanted answered, but you were heard and it mattered. And what you had to say was important. And so, yeah, my expectation would be when you stepped into that and you saw our teams working together, you saw our general managers acting as local market CEOs, is what I call them. You would get that sense clearly of who's the rock star.
Okay, now wait, there's a lot to unpack there. So wait a second. So can I just ask you one question? How many
Mhm.
employees do you have?
Roughly about 300
Okay.
across 37 locations.
Now, before I explore some of those questions John just
Mhm.
shared, I want to say something to our audience. Okay, I want you to digest something beyond the three questions he just shared. You got 300 employees across all those locations, right?
Yes, sir.
So John also told me when we first chatted that he gives his cell phone number to all his employees whenever they have a problem. Now think about this for a second. There's a lot of companies out there that have less than 100 employees, maybe less than 50 employees. How many of those CEOs are giving their cell phone number to everybody? He could be getting 300 calls a day. Hopefully, because his culture is really good, he's not. But you get the point.
Yeah.
And so there's a message there, and there's an intentionality there. John saying, "I'm here," and that's the ultimate lead by example right there.
Mhm.
So reading back these three questions, I want to talk about the silliest idea because you and I chatted about this, and
Mhm.
we already talked about language precision earlier in the call. So here we
Mhm.
are again.
Mhm.
So, silliest idea. Um, there's a little bit of an elephant in the room in the way you worded that question, John.
Sure.
Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I wanted to diffuse it down from what's the dumbest thing John is doing and give them some latitude to be creative. And so, you know, hopefully sometimes, I don't know, maybe I have to go back and look. I can't remember a time where my name was explicitly stated in the open-ended reply, but maybe it has been. But my view there is to take down the barriers and the pretentiousness and say, okay, what's the silliest thing we're doing as a company? What's the thing where you just shake your head like, why are they making me do this? And so that's the intentionality in that word choice and why we structured it that way.
John, did you find when you started asking these three questions, it's a two-part question. Are these anonymous responses? And regardless of whether they're anonymous, did you find the participation level? Because I'm assuming they weren't forced to answer. So
Mhm.
was it anonymous? And did you find the participation level pretty slow at first and it took a while to ramp up?
So it's always been anonymous.
Okay.
And in our last 4 survey cycles, we've had 100% compliance without any incremental incentive
Through that many employees?
through that many employees.
Wow. Now, here's a big question, and I'm very interested to hear your opinion on this.
Mm-hmm.
So, a big part of what we do at MindsetGo when we support culture of excellence and leadership
Mm-hmm.
development is psychological safety, right? So that's one of our first. People talk about
Yeah.
extreme ownership, like
Mhm.
psychological safety is right there to me,
Yep.
right? So I bring it up because when we consult with companies and they do culture assessments and employee
Mm-hmm.
engagement surveys, I make the joke and I'm half serious, half joking because I understand it's not as easy I'm making it is. Doesn't it imply that your survey has to be anonymous, that there isn't psychological safety at your company? Now, it's not as cut and dry as that. We both know
Sure.
that.
Mm-hmm.
However, my question is when you look at surveys like that, what do you attribute? Because when you get 50% adoption or 60,
Mm-hmm.
40% adoption, I always find that one of the biggest reasons low adoption has happens is not even the psychological safety as much as the leaders don't really support those questions being answered and follow up on the questions being answered to drive adoption. So, what do you think if you had to pinpoint two things that have led to 100% adoption in 4 cycles for our CEO listeners out there,
Mm-hmm.
what would they be?
It's that word follow up and follow through.
Yeah.
It's actually taking the results and owning the outcome. So so we look at the scores. So, I'm a recovering CFO. So I look at the scores and I compare them to prior periods. I compare them to national averages. We're benchmarking ourselves in that regard. And wherever we've declined period over period, or we're anywhere below the national, which generally, knock on wood, doesn't happen, we put an action plan in place because I want to respond to those specific questions and the needs underlying those questions. But then the fact that we go and address every open-ended comment in one of a varying forms, again, the newsletter article about a topic, or in our quarterly town hall, I'm literally saying, this is the feedback I got. Here's my view of it. That follow up and people understanding that you actually, quite honestly, give a damn is huge. I mean, I just think about my own life. Delta sends me a survey every time I fly on their planes, good, bad, or indifferent, and nobody ever even acknowledges the good, the bad, or the indifferent.
Nope.
It never happens. And so if you're just going to do a pencil whip exercise, get your scores and check the box off for some audit, some board committee, or some other executive in the organization, save yourself the time.
Well, it's such an enormous point you're making. I love the Delta point because, in my opinion, there's three reasons why people don't fill out surveys like that. One, because they don't think it'll matter.
Mm-hmm.
Two, because they don't think they have the time. And three, in many cases, because they don't think they'll be heard or there's safety, and which is leads to the
Sure.
anonymous piece. And the reason I bring this up is because when you say follow through, you're not doing what you're doing justice. I mean, yes, you're following through, but John, what I see is that when people receive bad news, bad
Mm-hmm.
results, red flags, or hear things because you have to see feedback as a gift, as corny as that
Absolutely.
sounds. You have to
No,
see
sir.
feedback
You're
as a
right.
gift.
Yes, you do.
So the problem becomes is that I find a lot of organizations feel like that if they identify 7 problems, that the expectation is that all 7 problems have to be addressed. And I don't agree with that. I think they need to be addressed, responded to, like you're
Acknowledged.
talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a system where we do it red flag, yellow flag, green flag. And red flag is this year, yellow flag is next year, and green
Mhm.
flag is obviously good. So that's the thing. And I think so many C suite executives are often afraid to have those difficult conversations because they feel like if they acknowledge the problem, now there's an expectation something has to be done
Right.
about it. And I'm curious if you've run into that mindset at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's probably some of my guys on our team. That's their initial reaction to this, and we've just worked together long enough, and I've really provided that to your point, psychological safety. I'm not looking for anybody to blame. I want to own it and fix it, and that's all I care about. All I care about is, are we addressing it in a thoughtful way? And at the end of the day, is the team member being taken care of? Whether that's taken care of in the fact that we've resolved something formally, or we've just acknowledged it, we hear you, can't do anything about it right now, or hey, we hear you, but here's why that's really not what you think it is. And another thing we do, and something I use as kind of a barometer for the organization. So we have an AI note taker on all our weekly location meetings.
Okay.
And we actually built an agent that then goes in and scores the meetings afterwards, the transcripts for the concepts of extreme ownership and how does it compare, the concepts of humanocracy, a book we really rely on, talking about a flat organization and minimal levels of command. But we also score psychological safety. How do
Mm.
people appear to feel? And so I get this interesting report on Saturday morning, along with a 30-minute podcast that is the summary of all those meetings throughout the week, so that I get that temperature, that cultural read on the organization.
Well, it's funny. Sorry, John. So I was meeting with a prospective client yesterday, and it was two brothers that own a business.
Mhm.
And it's not a huge business, probably 50 employees. And so they've scaled, their culture struggling.
Mhm.
And we talked about what I call the pillars of excellence, and psychological safety with ownership are the top two.
Mhm.
And so one of the brothers, it's blue collar. So one of the brothers looks at me and I said, so, what are your thoughts on psychological safety being one of your pillars? And he could not have been more uncomfortable. It's the old male stereotype of
Yeah.
just uncomfortable. And the best part is when he said he was uncomfortable, you could tell he didn't even really understand what it was. So I
Mhm.
looked at him and I said, can I ask you something? And he's like, sure. I said, are you a dad? And he goes, I am. He goes, I have a daughter, a 10-year-old daughter. And I said, would you acknowledge that probably the single best compliment you could get as a father or parent in general is that your daughter would tell you anything without any fear? And he goes, oh, yeah, absolutely. I go, congratulations, you've achieved psychological
Psychological
safety.
safety. Exactly.
So, in funny, John, like when I try to get, and it's usually, I hate to say it, I'm not trying to offend anybody, but it's usually men in the older generation, men that struggle with
Mhm.
the term.
Sure.
And when I'm trying to get the term to be relatable and resonate, that's the
Mhm.
example I give.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. I always love explaining things like that with that analogy, that story component of it. And yeah, you're spot on. That's awesome.
So you talked about you call your GMs local market CEOs,
Yeah.
and there's again another crossover. First, there's an empowerment element again, of course, there by calling them
Mhm.
CEOs. And I wonder, by calling them CEOs, how does the expectation change about how they tackle their role and responsibilities as opposed to if they were just local market GMs?
My intention in doing that is to further solidify or support the concept of ownership. As they look to me as the CEO of the organization, and the buck stops with me, and I hand out my cell phone number, and I measure how people feel through our Gallup surveys, and I'm making a genuine and sincere effort as the CEO of the larger organization. The idea is then you need to translate that to your location level. So further to that Q12 analysis and those open-ended questions, they
Hmm.
get their location-based results, assuming there's more than, I think, 4 people at their location. And so they have that information to be able to make those decisions, to communicate that output. And so I use that title on purpose. When I say it, I usually preface it with, technically they're general managers, because people outside the organization really don't understand what that means. So I probably need to stop doing that. Even just call them what they are, local market CEOs.
Does since people get very sensitive to titles, I'm just curious. A lot of times people are reluctant to give their managers elevated titles.
Yeah.
What when people work for you and they first hear that and they look at that, what do you get any kind of unique reaction? Like
Hmm.
what is the normal perception in your company about that?
I think the folks in those roles like it. I
Okay.
think that they appreciate that they're respected in that way, if you will. Um, and then, quite honestly, for the rest, whether it's my other C-suite team members or whatever it is, it's kind of one of the blessings of being the CEO. It's kind of is what it is.
Yeah, right,
I
right.
really, I really don't spend a lot of time thinking about that.
Well, let me ask you this. I believe that in my experience, when people get busy, which is the whole world, when people get busy, what typically as a leader falls off is thinking strategically or operationally.
Sure.
So that's what gravitated to me when you call them
Hmm.
the local market CEOs, because I'm
Hmm.
thinking now there's almost an embedded expectation of your responsibilities thinking higher level strategic operationally. Do you find that's been a byproduct in
Oh,
that role?
absolutely. I've promoted from those ranks into more senior executive levels in the organization. My chief operating officer was the general manager of my largest location, or probably second largest location, for a time. And so it has been a springboard to people taking on larger, even more strategically focused roles in the organization, for sure.
John, when you give these 3 question surveys, do you find that you as the CEO, I know you really value self-awareness. So
Hmm.
I'm just questioning you as a CEO, have you seen any kind of pattern of blind spots as the company's grown, as you've grown personally and professionally, either past or present, that have
Yeah.
reared?
So, what I would tell you is, I find that my communication isn't always as effective as I think it is. That I find there are areas where we have to continue to repeat, recycle, and address, you know, concerns and things that people have. So, as clear as I think I'm communicating it, it challenges me to step back and look in the mirror and really evaluate my approach. And so, if anything, I think it's helped make me a better communicator over the years. Um, there's another thing we do at the end of each of my annual meetings with all these local market CEOs when I bring them together. I give them a piece of paper and I tell them to tear it in half. And I ask them, what's the one thing you want me to start doing? And what's the one thing you want me to stop doing?
Mhm.
And actually, I don't know where my briefcase is, but I have a Ziploc bag that has all those in them. And I carry those around with me until the next year. And I'm looking at them periodically and trying to hold myself accountable. And so it's hard as a CEO in a lot of businesses to get real candid feedback. But I feel when you give people a blank piece of paper and you ask them 2 simple questions, I'm pretty impressed with how my guys step up and give me honest feedback.
Well, I'm just happy listening to that not only do we both have great hairstyles, but more importantly, that you use the word briefcase. So we clearly come from the same generation. So I'm
I
just
think
happy
it's
about that.
technically a backpack, but I'm Arthur Anderson, man. I was wearing the 3-piece suit with the cuffed pants, short of the
Oh
hat,
man.
So
Great.
yeah.
Great. Um, so I got to tell you, just actually building on that you carry those growth opportunities around in your
Mhm.
briefcase.
Mhm.
One thing that struck me is that you mentioned that I know you have a director of learning and development, and
Yeah.
but I also know that you share with me that we're back to being proactive versus reactive. And I know you made that investment early
Mhm.
on, perhaps even before you needed to, which word needed we'll have to use loosely. But I
Sure.
guess my bias, John, on this is
Mhm.
obviously being doing what I do for a living. I'm a nerd and a geek when it comes to learning and development.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I'm just curious. It's so hard for the C-suite to prioritize investment in that bucket. So I'm just curious, like, what inspired you to prioritize that?
Because I think personally, I get a kick out of learning. I'm the nerd that has the masterclass subscription and watches those things. I'm the guy that went back 10 years into my career to get my MBA I always joke, Notre Dame didn't want me as an undergrad, but they took my money as a grad student. And so I've had this sort of personal quest to learn and continue to get better. And as I watched organizations I was a part of, not necessarily in the CEO seat, struggle, a lot of it was that continuing development of their best people, investing in even those that maybe weren't the top performers but had more to give. And so I just bit the bullet. I joke, Dr. Mann might not feel this way. I describe him as a frustrated academic. And so I rescued him from academia. And he's now leading our charge and doing an amazing job. And yeah, to me, it's just more of that. What am I going to provide in the way of value to our team members beyond that paycheck? It's got to be a safe place to work. It's got to be a place that you want to show up and actually hang out for 8, 10, 12 hours a day. And then a place that actually cares about you, listens to what you think and how you feel and reacts to it. And a place that invests in you and making you better, whether it's here long term or at your next stop.
Okay. I wonder, for a thoughtful guy like yourself, I wonder what has probably been, and you're probably going to be like, geez, Mark, I wish I had more time to think about this, but what is probably the most impactful piece of feedback you've received in your career? And I want to say, but
Mhm.
constructive,
Yeah, no,
right?
I'll give it
Something
to
that,
you. I got you an answer.
okay, all right.
Yeah, I sucked in emotional intelligence. I was
Hmm.
terrible early in my career. I was a bull in the china shop. Back in those Anderson days, I wanted to be a partner at Arthur Anderson, and by golly, I was going to do everything I could in my power to make that happen as quickly as possible. And that didn't always include taking a minute to think about who I was working with and how I was reacting to situations. And so taking my emotional intelligence quotient up has made all the difference in the world. And there's two guys in particular at Arthur Anderson that really poured into me and
Hmm.
kind of pulled me aside and got me on the right path. And I'm forever indebted to those guys.
Wow. Do you, emotional intelligence, and we actually, so this may be interesting to you, we actually refer to it as emotional agility. And the
Sure.
reason why we do that is
Mhm.
because um, I've heard people get triggered by the term intelligence. And so, like, I changed, just started calling it, and plus, agility is such a more mainstream word in corporate America.
Well, I got to tell you, Mark, I'm not that intelligent and I'm darn sure not that agile.
Agile.
So I don't know. It's just, I'm emotionally better, I guess, is what I would say.
Well, so I just want to ask one follow-up though, because the three aspects of emotional agility that I think are incredibly hard for people in general, let alone executives, business owners, whatever. One is what I consider, and I'll go to my grave arguing this with anybody, the single most important human skill is self-awareness, right?
Absolutely.
Can't change anything until you recognize the opportunity to do so.
Yes, sir.
The other two pieces, though, are when you talk about emotion management, I break it down into just simply calling it knowing how to respond versus react, right?
Mhm.
Just what does it look like if you were responding? And we know, John, right? Responding is thoughtful, reacting is impulsive, right? So that's the simple difference. And then the third part is using empathy in an authentic way as a tool of influence. So I'm curious, when you hear me say those things, was there a specific aspect of emotional intelligence that when you hear me say it like that, go, oh, yeah, Mark, let me tell you, this is my struggle?
So the empathy was my early struggle.
Okay.
And still to this day, the reaction is sometimes a struggle. It really is. And I mean, out there for the world on the ether internet for all eternity. But it happens. I don't have it all figured out. I don't. I mean, I'm a hayseed from Kentucky. I'm doing the best I can. And, you know, there are times where I react instead of respond still to this day. So I got more to do.
Okay. So one last question for now
Mhm.
is um, I I think of when I think of people's willingness to change,
Mhm.
I think of three things. I think of if someone's going to change, they have to be motivated to change. They have to see the benefits of the change,
Mhm.
and they have to actually see consequences of inaction if they don't change. And I introduced that because you shared a story, and and I know we're both really big on behavior change.
Mhm.
So about we're going to call it the rubber band idea. And I really want this. I was so excited when you shared this story because
Mhm.
it's what I call the ultimate top of mind strategy. And so if you would share with our listeners how that originated and what that's
Well,
about.
I'll show up with props. So, about 90 days ago, I gave each one of my local market CEOs 3 rubber wristbands with the logo on it because I can't miss an opportunity to advertise. And I said, over the next 90 days, I want you to put these 3 on one wrist in the morning or one corner of your desk. And every time you go above and beyond what's expected of you at work or even at home with your family, I want you to move one of those wristbands to the other corner. And if you do that for me every day for 90 days, at the end of that 90 days, I want you to take this challenge coin that I had made for them, which has the extreme ownership stuff on the back and our core tenants and so forth. You can take this coin and you can award it to one team member who will receive $1,000 bonus when you award it to them. And one of my qualifiers was you do it for the 90 days, you post on LinkedIn, and then you can award the coin. It's been fun seeing those posts come through this last week because we're hitting about the 90-day mark. And some of the guys just admitting, hey, I didn't do it every day, but here's what I learned. Or, hey, I did it every day and this is what I learned. Or, hey, in the course of doing this, I realized my team is the one going above and beyond every day. And it's just been, man, it's just impactful to hear these voices and these guys that don't always post on LinkedIn, but out there just putting it out there for the world. And I think it's a testament to our team.
I want to be clear on something to make sure I understood. So when they accomplish the 90 days,
Mm-hmm.
they get to pick someone to award that $1,000 due. And is there any qualifier into who they pick?
It's their choice.
None. So it's just a recognition.
It's a attaboy, pat on the back, whatever for someone they believe, whether it's in their location or somewhere in the larger corporation that has, in their opinion, gone above and beyond the way they have over the last 90 days.
And John, what got me so inspired by hearing that from you is because you're and I want to make sure I'm saying this in a way that aligns with what you're actually doing,
Mm-hmm.
but that our listeners really gravitate to. To me, we are a world that is driven by outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get that. That's what business is, outcomes. We understand. And for me, I've always said, if you get people to practice consistent habits and behaviors that you need to succeed, the outcomes will be there organically.
That's right.
And what you're saying is, if you budgeted, and tell me if you would agree with this,
Mm-hmm.
if you budgeted $10,000 for this initiative and said, there'll maybe be 10 people that give $1,000,
Mm-hmm.
and you had to give $50,000, you'd be like, that's
Do it.
really good,
Do it.
right?
Do it. Do it in a heartbeat. Absolutely.
Because you know it's leading to the
Mm-hmm.
growth of the company and the kinds of things that lead to success and
Right.
extreme ownership and excellence, correct?
Yeah. And I tell my guys, customers don't see our intentions, they see our actions.
Mm.
And so, yeah, no, absolutely. Whatever the check needs to be, eh, we're accomplishing the mission as a team and we're doing that in the right way. I'm all in.
Joan, before we wrap up today, will you just
Mm.
share a little bit about Warehouse on Wheels and just so
Sure.
what it is and if people want to do business with you and
Yeah.
how whatever you think's helpful?
No, that'd be great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. So, Warehouse on Wheels is basically we take trailers, the back of a semi, this thing over my shoulder here, the 53-foot box. We call it a 53-foot dry van. We take that when truckers are done with it, 10, 12, 15 years old. We give it a fresh coat of paint, a fresh inspection to make sure that it's safe, dark, and dry. We rent that into the supply chain of manufacturers, distributors, retail. Anybody who needs just a little bit more space. The warehouse is full. The dock doors are blocked. You need to get stuff out of the way. You have a container arriving and you have nowhere to put it. Instead of paying $200 a day for the container, pay $200 a month for our trailer. And we do that for over 6,000 customers across our 37 locations. And most of our businesses have been doing it for almost 25 years now at this point, even before we started building this business. So, yeah, we're flexible industrial storage, dock height, and we're 2 to 4 times less expensive than a warehouse. And we only require a 30-day contract, not 5, 7, or 10 years.
All right, now I think everybody's probably listening and saying, Mark, you're not going to let him get away with the most obvious thing that you're not going to ask him today, which is clearly, is Notre Dame still getting favored with TV coverage in the media? Like, how would I not end with that? Like, you gotta be held accountable for that. Like, so
Uh,
what's your answer to that?
uh, Somebody this week pleaded the fifth a few times. Maybe I should do that.
That's great. John, what a pleasure.
My honor. Thank you, sir.
Really look forward to connecting with you offline. And yeah, thank you for the time and enjoy the conversation. And yeah, that's going to wrap it up for iCommunicate. For John Brooks, I'm Mark Altman. We'll see you next time.